Welcome to Between Sundays, a podcast from Union Grove Baptist Church where we take the truths we talk about on Sunday and bring them into everyday life. Because faith isn't just for one day of the week, it's for all of them. I'm your host, David Jayne, and each episode we'll sit down with our pastors to unpack how God's Word meets us right where we are, at work, at home, in our relationships, and in the real stuff of life. Thanks for joining us as we learn how to live out our faith between Sundays. All right, guys, welcome to UG Between Sundays, the podcast that helps us apply what we learned on Sundays to our week between Sundays, but also gives us the opportunity to dive a little deeper than we can get from the pulpit. And that's not to say Josh doesn't do a great job. However, some of our opinions, I know you want to preach the Bible from the pulpit. So, joining us, special guest, Pastor David Ivarson. PI, as they call you.
I never refer to myself that way, but I'm okay with it from
Nice.
Students. Yeah.
So we wanted to do something for the first time that just kind of random, kind of rapid fire questions to get to know each of us a little bit better. So I'll say the question, you answer, I'll answer, and then I'll say the next question. So coffee or tea?
Definitely tea. Hot tea usually.
Coffee.
Coffee for me. Early bird or night owl?
Can it be both?
Yeah,
Maybe. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both.
As a youth pastor, I think that's
a little bit
okay.
of both.
I think David and I are alike in that because we've gone to see some very late movies together. But then we're kind of, I'm up as well early in the morning.
I'm more productive in the morning.
Yeah, me too.
I think I'm up, but not necessarily awake in the morning.
Until you have coffee.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Favorite college team?
Florida State Seminoles.
Duke Blue Devils.
Duke as well. Yep. Go-to fast food spot?
Chick-fil-A.
Nice.
Cookout.
I don't know what mine is, I guess. We like to switch it up. But so actually this is a dessert one, but Twin City Sweets.
That is great.
Very good.
Yep,
That
we
is
go
a great
there
choice.
almost every week.
Oh.
Favorite book besides the Bible?
I would say Strong Men, Dangerous Times by Jim Ramos.
So one of the most impactful books that I ever read was probably Gospel by J.D. Greer.
Nice. Yeah. For me, it was The Chronicles of Narnia, probably The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah.
Very cool.
Mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Mountains.
I don't know. I'm torn. I think we go to the beach, so I'd say beach. Favorite worship song right now?
Oh, wow.
Just in this moment.
That's... I would probably say right now, Holy Forever.
Nice.
I'm trying to think. I wish I could pull up my Spotify playlist. I would probably go Throne Room by Charity Gale.
Nice. Mine is, I think, Eden by Benjamin William Hastings. One hobby you wish you had more time for?
Oh, I would like to learn how to play guitar. I just make time to do it.
Golf. I play some, but I don't have the time to play near as much as I would love to play.
Nice. I think the gym in some ways, I wish I could go longer, but it's just I have to wake up earlier if I want to go longer, so don't really like doing that. iPhone or Android?
I don't think that's a debate. iPhone.
iPhone. Yeah. Dream vacation spot?
Hawaii.
Dude, that's me and Abby's dream as well. So Hawaii, we've
Hawaii.
talked about that for years.
I think for us it's somewhere in Europe. Morgan's got Greece she wants to go to. I want to go to like Italy. So that's maybe.
Yeah, those are great
I'll
places.
go different than him. Since he said Hawaii, I will say our second choice, but it would be awesome as Alaska. We've always talked about that as well. Yeah.
Nice. And favorite dessert?
I would say the chocolate molten cake from Chili's.
You used to work at
I used
Chili's,
to work
right?
there. It was very good.
Cheesecake.
Okay. I would say very, very specific here. I referenced Twin City Sweets earlier. Not a sponsor, but I will say I get the Winston Worm No Squirm, which is a sundae by them. That's really good.
Okay.
Really good. Yep. All right. So kind of getting into what we're supposed to be talking about today. We actually did have one question emailed in. And so feel free to submit your questions, preferably Sunday after the message, so I can kind of compile them and send them to these guys. And also, we film on Mondays. Today's Tuesday, but normally like Monday, Tuesday, so we don't want to get like a submission Wednesday, Thursday, Friday because they come out Wednesday morning. But the question, and just to preface this question, we were on the third commandment, which is don't take God's name in vain. Your message, don't shame God's name. And one thing I'll just say real quick is I'd actually never heard that we could shame God's name in reference to the third commandment by our actions. So I thought that was really cool. Just you say, you know, OMG or whatever, and you can say that, but also we can say that through our actions as well. So reducing, dragging down God's name. So I thought that was cool. This is kind of along those lines. The question was, which of the following words would be acceptable for my kids to use? And then you have like substitutes for kind of God's name, Christian curse words, as they're called. But like, you know, and I'm just saying these so we can say them. Geez, gosh, golly.
Watch your mouth, David.
Gosh darn. I mean, golly
What a
gee.
filthy potty mouth.
You know, so you got kind of, instead of saying the name of Jesus, we kind of like have that first syllable, geez. And I've said that before, and Morgan's been like, I don't know if you, like, it's kind of a substitute
Teetering
that's
the
pretty
line.
close. Yeah. Gosh is a super popular one because you don't want to say God's name in vain. So you say, oh my gosh. Or, you know, just something to say when you get hurt or you're frustrated or something. What are y'all's like opinions on these kind of Christian curse words? Is it too much of a substitute? Is kind of what the question is referencing.
I mean, we would call them, this is a term I used to hear a lot. I don't hear it as much, but euphemisms. So that, I guess, Christian curse words is what they are, or just words that are there that we've created in our culture to replace something else. And so are they wrong? So I can say, geez. That's one that I have said. And when I was studying this, it's a really good question because I think you have to put it through a filter. Every word that you use needs to go through a filter. So I would say that a couple questions you need to ask yourself before you use certain words that are considered euphemisms, like the ones you mentioned, like, does it bring to mind the word you're replacing? If the answer is yes, then I would say probably avoid using it. So if that word is coming to mind, I think that's a good filter to use when you're thinking of those type of words. I also think, like, are you using the word, even though it is a replacement for a different word? Another question that you could ask yourself is, are you using it in a sinful way still? So like, even though it's a euphemism and you feel better about yourself that you're not saying the other word, you could still be using it in a sinful way and shaming his name in the process. And so I think any word that you use that's replacing something else or replacing God's name, you need to bring it through that grid. And if you're using it in a sinful way, or it's bringing to mind the word that you're trying to replace, then I would probably avoid using that. So.
Yeah, I like that. I agree with having the filter. I find it really hard to put like a list of okay words out there because I think it's definitely about your heart and what you mean in that moment and what are you so frustrated about. A lot of our frustrations, and maybe that's why people take God's name in vain, is because ultimately I think our frustrations are against God. Like if we're unhappy with our lot in life or how much money we make or a job or family issues or whatever, I think that's kind of a direct assault towards him, and so that may be why we're saying something. Or maybe it's you stub your toe and you're just frustrated because the bed that you put there 7 months ago is still there. I mean, just those kind of things happen. So I think it'd be difficult and a little bit tricky if we got to where, okay, these words are okay and these words are not. But so I think it stems from kind of where your heart is in that moment. But the filter thing is great
You know
too.
what would be interesting? All those words that you mentioned, I'd be curious to find the origin of those.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I'd be curious because I bet you a lot of those words you used were actually created and first used as a replacement, direct replacement. So the origin of those, I mean, I'm not going to take the time to figure that out.
Yeah.
Maybe David, you can do that in your own spare time. But my thing is like, I wonder if they really were. Somebody said, okay, I can't say this, so I'm going to replace it with, oh my gosh. You know, and I wonder if the origin is attached to that, which would also make you really say, okay, if that's where the origin was, it was a direct replacement for taking his name in vain, then I would definitely err on the side of caution of that for sure, so that you don't shame it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, both of y'all, that was cool insight I'd never thought of before. So one thing that I had wrote down in reference to your message as you were going through is that I just thought it was interesting how Satan, over the hundreds of years, especially, you know, the last 100 years that we've kind of solidified American culture, he's taken the commandments and just made them like commonplace to break. He's like, it's almost like in reference to, specifically this week, God's name in vain, and you mentioned some of the ways people take it, but it's almost like commonplace, and you'll see comedians do it a lot, so it's like funny, and we'll laugh at it, which I think is like almost a secondary violation of, you know, laughing at that.
Right.
So, in reference to God's name, and it's the name above all names, but do y'all have any more insight into why the name of God is so important? I know you mentioned even like, and I don't want to keep on like reiterating your message in here, but I know one of the things you mentioned is that it shows who God is, and there's those different names in the Old Testament: healer, the one who provides, and that. But other than those kinds of things, why is the name of God so important?
I mean, it's just that it reveals his character, and I think who God is in his name. And names in Scripture are so important because they reveal identity in a lot of ways. You see that even in the Old Testament when God would change, you know, the name of Abram to Abraham, or change, you know, Jacob to Israel or whatever. They always were changed because it identified them. It was their identity. So I think character was attached to names. I don't see that as much in our culture today. So I think it's hard for us to fully understand or grasp how that was. But when we talk about the name of God, his character is in that name. That's why you have those names in the Old Testament, like Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Rapha, you know, and all these Nisi and all these different names. It reveals who he is. And that's why I think his name's so important. That's why I think this commandment is so important. I hate that our culture takes it so lightly today, but I think the reason it's important is because when you shame his name or you use it to misrepresent him, you're really shaming who God is at the core of that. And so I think I would say that's why it's so important. I mean, what would you add to that?
I agree. I like the way you said it on Sunday. Just don't shame and don't profane God's name. And so that's when you would be trying to make it based. And we don't necessarily think, here's my goal in this, but this is just what happens. We just make it to where it's common. God's name is common versus something that we would do. And we've definitely lost that. So I loved the way that you kind of promoted and talked through it on Sunday. I was like, let's kind of return to names that mean something specifically about God. I know in our family, our youngest biological son is named Asa. And so we got to the point where we named him after a king of Israel. That was Judah actually. It was so good. He followed God with his whole life, but it took us a while to get there because Avery, our boy before him, means Lord of the Elves. So like we didn't choose that based on the meaning necessarily, but yeah.
Can I call him Lord of the Elves next time I see him?
Absolutely. So yeah, you get to the point where we may have come a long way from that, and it's a good way to be called back to, okay, well, God did that on purpose, like you said, with Abram and to Abraham and others throughout the Bible. Like he did something based on a specific revelation that he gave to them, that he wanted to call them either out of or into or both. And then they were known after that. And so then you think about the implications of when his son calls him Abraham. Like he's like, oh, think about that. He used to be Abram. Now I'm Abraham. What does that mean? And maybe not every single time would he stop in his tracks and think through that, but I'm sure there were times where that came up, and that was exactly probably what God was thinking like, okay, this is going to remind him of who I am and what I've done for him.
And I don't think I can add to that. I don't even think like we need to get back to everything the Old Testament did in this regard. Like in terms of how they revered it, they wouldn't say it out loud. I mean, the scribes wouldn't write it, because of fear of using it incorrectly or irreverently. But I do think that there's a principle here that our church and followers of Christ need to get back to. We have to get back to the sacredness of it. And I think we've lost that. I think we've lost the seriousness of the name of God. We use it all the time, and hardly, like you said, it becomes normal. And I think that's an attack of the enemy in this commandment in our culture, and we just kind of don't take it near as serious. I think that's what we have to fundamentally get back to.
What, talking about like the ancient, sacredness that people had, what, in your preparation for this or your knowledge, what would it have looked like for an ancient, Israelite to take his name in vain? It would, same way we would today, like, oh my, Yahweh, or,
Oh my
like,
Yahweh.
like,
Yeah.
did you come across that at all? Like, that's a kind of a deep.
Yeah, I mean, I referenced a couple things that just so that our listeners know, like Israel, Jewish people would not say it out loud. They wouldn't say the name Yahweh out loud a lot of times, and sometimes it's still practice for Jewish people to not want to say the name Yahweh out loud, God's covenant name, for fear of misrepresenting Him or fear of shaming Him, and that's in any conversation that they're having. Could you imagine that? Like that's how serious they took them. One thing that I learned this week when I was studying that I didn't know before was about scribes when they would write. That they would, when they came to the name of God, His covenant name, Yahweh, they would stop what they were doing before they wrote that name, and they would go and they would bathe and purify themselves because they wanted to make sure that they wrote it without any sin in their life. They would confess sin. They would do, and like I said, I'm not suggesting or saying that we need to get back to that. Okay. But I am saying that there was such a sacredness to His name and a high regard and reverence to it that somewhere through history we have just lost it. And so I think for us today, because we use it so casually, like I mentioned, I saw a T-shirt, it said, this has been several years ago, I saw it said, like, Jesus is my homeboy. And I understand, and if you have that shirt or whatever, I mean, I understand the premise of it. Jesus is a friend of sinners and things like that. But I think we have just casually, like, brought Him in, by saying things like the man upstairs and, oh, man, he's my co-pilot and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of like, I don't think you fully understand or grasp the sacredness of who He is and the seriousness of who He is. And I think for us, we need to stop and think, and I think it would do us good before we mention His name to think about it contextually and to think about its usage and to think about a high regard before we say it. So definitely, I don't think we go back to the Old Testament where we don't say it at all. No, it's okay to say it, but before you do, I think it's good that you put it through that grid. Like, how am I using this? Am I bringing Him glory with using this? And if the answers are no, or you're bringing Him lower because of it, then I would probably refrain from saying it. And that's something we can learn from the nation of Israel.
Yeah, I like that. I like that description of it, and that even the disclaimer there. I think, like, as we're in the New Testament, we're called to be ambassadors. So, like, everywhere we go, we carry His name. And so I think it's keeping our hands pure, and even more than that, our hearts pure as we do that kind of carrying. I think there are a lot of similarities between what they did and what we do. Like, they would take false oaths, like they would swear in His name, like, okay, I swear to God that I'm going to do this, that I'm going to show up when I'm supposed to show up, or do this or that. And I know the New Testament talks real clearly about let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. Just let you be a person who people can take you at your word, whatever you say, yes or no. Make sure you follow through and that you're going to do it. Maybe using God's name for selfish gain, like, again, like I swear that I'll do this, or just kind of proclaiming yourself even to be a Christ follower. And that would be a little bit more for today, but to be a Christ follower when you're really not living it. So I think those are some things that kind of fall into that category, I would say.
Yeah.
Do y'all think that this commandment is broken more by lukewarm believers or people? And I know we all mess up, so I'm not, but people who regularly, like habitually break this, or by people who are not saved that attend church? Just kind of like believers, unbelievers. I know my initial thing would be unbelievers, but I don't know. What do y'all think?
I'm going to let David
You'll
handle
go
this
first
one
on this
first.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I guess it's just the idea of not thinking, not running it through the filter.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could really be any of us. That could be us that work at church. That could be somebody who doesn't have a lot of church experience and kind of anywhere in between, just because you hear it in the culture. It's the first thing that comes to your mind whenever something happens that you're frustrated about. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that maybe could come out of that.
I mean, like the question, like if it's lukewarm or people that go to church, I think it's both.
Yeah.
I hate to kind of not answer your question exactly the way, because I'm sure you're looking for an either or, but in a lot of ways, like I think it's both. I think our church people, that attend, I think that they struggle with it. I mean, and that's not just church people. I mean, that's pastors too. That's church leaders. And I mean, you see it. It just becomes normal. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is, if we trace this back, over time, we went from, going back to the Old Testament, what they did when it came to the name of God. And over time, the enemy has allowed it to become so normal to where I think at one time it was probably church leaders were way more cautious, and then it crept its way into church. And I bet if you traced how it became normal to 2025, it kind of worked itself through. And now it's just the entire church culture that we live in, where we just kind of just casually use his name in so many different ways that a lot of times I think misrepresent his character and shame who God is. And if that's the case and you haven't put it through that filter to come out on the other side purely using his name, then I would say we're guilty of violating the third commandment.
Who do you think, other than God, because he's the one who gave this commandment, and I know ultimately it's an offense to God, but who, other than him, who do you think it does more damage to? People in the church who maybe see someone they respect who take his name in vain, so it kind of like, wait, I thought that was a big deal. Is it not that big of a deal? Or misrepresenting who God is to unbelievers?
It's a really good question. I think fundamentally the answer is both again, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of really give you my take on it. I think it's Christians. And my reasoning is because if Christians see other Christ followers using his name in vain, I think it gives them a false sense of who God is, and it misrepresents him. And if the church is misrepresenting God within the church, then it will definitely impact and limit the gospel work being done to unbelievers. So I think it starts within the church. The church has to have a high regard of his name, and we must, one another, be willing to call it out when we see someone shaming his name in a loving way, of course. But I think we have to, within the walls of the church, take this seriously. And then, because I think if your question, does it impact unbelievers or believers more? Well, unbelievers expect you, or they kind of like, it does impact them, but they almost would rejoice when you would use his name in a shameful way, because, they don't know Christ. They don't know him yet, and they don't understand his character. And so I think it starts within the church. And so I would say it impacts the church worse or more because it'll impact their gospel witness to the unbelievers. That's where I would land on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that it's a both and I'll come from the other side since you handled the believer side. Especially living in like the Bible Belt where we live and live for a while when we're in Tennessee, like unbelievers in this area know and have a certain expectation for how Christians should act and speak, and so they're probably maybe a little bit taken back whenever we do the same things that the world would want us to do. That's kind of what Romans 12:2 talks about, how they want to squeeze us into their mold. I mean, that's what the world wants to do, line up a line of Christians and unbelievers, and us look the same, talk the same, listen to the same music, do all those kind of things, treat our families the same so that you can tell no difference. And how does God say to push against that is to be renewed by His Word, by thinking differently based on what we find in His Word. And so, yeah, I think it's a both and, but I can see it pretty common in both, coming from both sides.
Well, is there anything that's kind of like the lines of questioning that I had? Is there anything that y'all thought interesting or just a little more insight to add or something, some kind of, oh, this was cool and I haven't heard it yet?
I loved the way that you put it on Sunday, just the don't shame and don't profane gives me a really simple filter to run things through. Like if I'm about to say this flippantly, let's be careful because we don't want to be flippant, but also we want to make sure that, okay, where's my heart in this, and what are the ideas and reasonings that are stemming from why I'm wanting to say this and kind of treat maybe God's name not as high as it should be held.
Mm-hmm.
I learned on Sunday at lunch from a couple of people that they had never heard the term that I used, God awful. And so I have said that, and when I was studying this, I kind of got convicted. So it made me feel old because these people were younger, and I was kind of like, okay. And so I was like, okay, that must be a new or an older person term, and so I don't consider myself old, but I'm just kind of like I'm getting in that category or whatever. But for me, I think the biggest takeaway, it's what you alluded to right off the bat. The biggest takeaway is I've always interpreted this to be taking God's name in vain through my lips. Mm-hmm. And I've basically limited the commandment to that in my life. And so I have been around the church my entire life. So I've kind of felt like, man, if I don't say, oh my, then I'm doing well, right? And I'm abiding by this commandment. I'm great. I can go on to the next one and I'm doing well. When I was studying this, I really believe that there's a deeper issue within the church. It's not just taking His name with our lips. It's taking up His name with our behaviors in an irreverent way. And that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that I might be doing real well with my lips, but if my actions are irreverently using His name by how I live, because I've taken up His name at the moment of salvation, then I am breaking and violating that commandment as well by my actions. And so that's the biggest takeaway for me, because I guess I just always limited it to my words and felt I was doing really well. But then it's like, okay, when there's inconsistencies with how I live and what I say I believe, then I've probably shamed His name by my behaviors. So,
Yeah. And one thing I just want to close with is that the Christian team jersey would probably be blue and black, I assume. That's kind of what you came across.
100%.
Nice. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's everything for today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Pastor P.I., for joining us here as well. And
this is great. I enjoyed it.
This is your first podcast episode
Yeah.
with us, man.
Nice.
Welcome to the family.
Yeah. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Beyond my sin and beyond my failure, you called me to be on your side. Beyond the east and the west, you called my name. I want the right.
So one thing, as you were going through your message on Sunday, that I wrote down just to kind of preface some of our other topics here. Fix this real quick. This is something obviously I can cut out.
Doesn't want to be fixed.
While you're doing that, I'm taking a sip of that over here.
All right. Technical difficulty.